Today we have Sourav Das, who lives in San Francisco but is originally from New Delhi. He completed PBP in 2019 in a time of 82 hours and 26 minutes. Sourav, thank you so much for volunteering. I really appreciate it, okay?
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay. First question, always the same. What does completing PBP mean to you?
Well, s- completing PBP, it's really been a journey. It was PBP for me was as much about the ride as it was getting to PBP. And so, to me, it was really like a high point in my cycling journey and a high point in my life. And, it's been 5 years now since I did the ride, and I sort of, as they say, randomnesia sets in. And so
Yeah,
now I have all these memories of PBP, and it's a fond memory. I look back at it, and it feels great. And it was before the pandemic, so that makes it you
yeah,
know extra special. And yeah, so and sort of when you approached me for this for with this idea, it's taken me back to I'd sort of not thought about PBP for a while, and now I have, and
yeah,
it's brought back a lot of good memories.
yeah. I read your excellent ride report, by the way. It was really helped me understand a lot about your experience, so thank you. Can you tell me, Sourav, like what did it feel like at the finish line, if you can remember all those years ago?
Well, so again, at the finish line, for a variety of reasons, the ride had been harder than I had envisioned it to be, and I guess we'll get into that later. I was relieved that I was going to finish, as I was rolling into Rambouillet from True, and I sort of knew that barring some catastrophic failure, I was going to finish. At that time, it was great that all the things had gone wrong, nothing went catastrophically wrong to end my ride, so I was happy to finish. But um, it's also made me kind of, there was like this contemplative and deep feeling where I'm about to finish PBP. And it's more than a bike ride. It's really a cultural phenomenon, and you're in the middle of it. And you as the rider and a potential finisher are at the center of it. And so
Yeah,
I was thinking back about all the rides I've done, every little step that have brought me to PBP, to that moment. And and when I think back about it, I never had any grand cycling ambitions,
yeah,
and I never really saw myself partaking in something of this scale and finishing successfully. And it's so it was really I was elated, of course.
yeah,
It was a great feeling, but it was also just, I mean, there was like, I hadn't given too much thought into all of this because I was so into the logistics and the difficulty of the ride and so on. And finally, now that I'm about to finish, it was all sinking in. So
yeah.
yeah.
That's great. Maybe let's go back to the start, your first memory on a bike. Like ultimately, how did you end up riding PBP 2019? Maybe something about that journey to get there.
Okay, well, this is so yeah. I mean, I grew up in New Delhi, India,
Yep.
which is a very big city, very very urban environment that I grew up in, and I had a bike as a kid. In fact, I had two bikes. I sort of grew out of one bike into like a road bike with flat bars.
Yeah.
My riding was nothing much to speak of. If you look at cycling as a whole and what we do now, it was really not much. But some of my earliest memories are that my parents used to set boundaries for me, like you can't go
Yeah.
beyond this street and
Yeah.
you can't exit this gate and so on. And I would still go and do it. Like I had this curiosity, like, oh, what lies
Yeah.
there, and can I get there on
Yeah.
my own? So that I had that feeling of like, I liked the fact that I could get somewhere, but I didn't really carry it forward for. And really, like, when I was growing up, there was not much infrastructure, and it's not really possible to get to places on a bike. So
Yeah.
what you can
Yeah.
do on a bike is sort of limited, but within those constraints, I did do some riding. And then, somewhere in my mid-teens, I got into this a minor collision on the bike, and the frame broke, and that was really the end of my cycling because,
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, you become, I was a teenager, and then you get carried away with other activities, school, and other
Definitely.
things.
Yeah.
And then, at age 18, I moved to the US for college.
So, Saurav, can I ask you one question, just maybe about cycling in India?
Yeah.
So I suspect back then when you were young, maybe like where I grew up, it wasn't really a thing. There was no bike culture. There were toys essentially. Have you been back since, and has the culture around biking kind of changed?
Well, I mean, if anything, I would say the traffic is now a lot worse than it was.
Okay.
There's a lot more cars on the
Yeah.
road. And so I think traffic is actually busier, but it really depends on where you live. And so where my parents are still there. And, where we live is still very urban, very densely
Yeah.
populated. And so
Yeah.
it's really not possible to get to places on a bike. There are people who do it and they do it for leisure. So, they might wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and,
Yeah.
and, and ride somewhere, but you can't really do the kind of 200 Ks and 300 Ks that we do and have those kind of quality roads just because
I get you. Yeah.
there's no real there's no real bike lanes and
Yeah.
the whole awareness around cyclists is not really there.
Cool. Anyway, sorry. So you went to the United States, I think. Was it for college? I think that
Yeah,
you were going to just say that. Yeah.
right. So at age 18, um, I moved to Philadelphia. And again, Philly, it's again a big city. I could walk and use public transport as needed. And, I was again busy with college and other things.
Yeah.
And really the bike didn't sort of feature much. I didn't give it much thought. Um, then from Philadelphia, I moved to Santa Barbara for graduate school.
Oh,
And so this
okay.
is where, for the first time in my life, I am in a very beautiful part of the world, possibly one of the most beautiful places you can live in.
Yeah.
And, for the first time, I'm outside of an urban environment in like this very scenic place. And that's where like the whole sort of appreciation for outdoors sort of generally came in because it's hard not to notice, right? You have the Pacific Ocean on one side and you have
Yeah.
Santa Ynez Mountains on the other side. And
Yeah.
so that's where, I started. I mean, I didn't pick up a bike. I didn't pick up cycling there, but I sort of enjoyed just getting out and I started doing like more like leisurely walks. I would do like 1 or 2 hour walks sometimes by the
Yeah.
coast and that's where I started realizing the sort of the mental benefits of being outside and being in nature. And that sort of made me, I would look around and say, oh, there's a mountain. I wonder what it's like on the top. I bet it's a good view. And, it'd be nice to go
Yeah.
hike there or bike there. And but again, I had a like really cheap department store bike that I used for commuting, but that didn't get me very far. And the person at the bike co-op once told me that you're going to spend more to fix that bike.
Yeah.
And so, well, I was there for about 2 years and yeah, didn't really do much on a bike. But then in 2011, I moved to the Bay Area, and this was where that thought of I had this desire to do like more outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
And so I used to take a bus every day to get to work. I didn't own a car then, and so I'd be taking the bus, and it was one up in the South Bay. It's there's one bus every hour. So
Yeah.
and that's when I started thinking like, why not ride to work? I'm about 10 miles, which is a good biking distance.
Nice
And
distance. Yeah.
from my previous experience, I knew that I didn't want a cheap bike because it doesn't feel good to ride. It's just I wanted something nice. And so I ended up getting, a colleague of mine helped me, pick a used bike, which he thought was a good one to get started on. And so that's why I was a commuter, and that's how I got my start.
Yeah.
I'm really not an athlete, right? So it's really and I should also mention that over these years, I'd also put on a fair amount of weight. I wasn't like a
Okay.
very physically fit person. I'm not sure that I would call myself obese, but I mean, I was definitely over 200 pounds. That's what
Okay.
I remember.
Okay.
So from my daily commutes, that's where, you wonder, hey, we have all these mountains all around here. It's really nice. Why not look up some scenic routes? Like we have mountains all around us. And so you go on Google and you search for,
Yeah.
South Bay biking routes because
Yeah.
I don't know any cyclists at this point.
Yeah.
When I picked Mount Eden Road, that's between Cupertino and Saratoga.
Okay.
And anyone who lives and rides in the South Bay will know Mount Eden Road. It's
Yeah.
you know not a very hard climb, but it was and now I would I think my PR up that road is in like 4.5 minutes.
Okay.
But back then it took me quite a while, right? Because I didn't know how to
Okay.
shift, and
Yeah.
I'm still learning how to climb and pedal
Yeah.
efficiently. And I sort of, I made it up to the top there, and I would do that loop, and then that from there, Highway 9 is nearby, and Highway 9 is like, it's the gateway to the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Okay.
It takes you to Big Basin and Castle Rock, and so that's where that was my first big climb on the bike. While I'd been doing these rides, I'd noticed like there were weekend group rides,
Yeah.
and I always thought those guys are way faster than me. Like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
stick with them, and I'm not in their league. But I think gradually, like, I looked at some of I researched some of those clubs, and I found the Alto Velo Cycling Club. So
Yeah.
it's mostly based in South Bay in the peninsula. And I decided that, I'll let me make it to one of their rides. And if I get dropped, that's fine, because I know the route
Yeah.
and I can still do my own ride and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I think then this was like, we're talking about May 2012. I showed up on my first B ride, and I'm
Yeah.
on my, commute bike here, and everybody's, kitted out and everything. And it was a
Exactly.
little overwhelming. And, you know,
Were they friendly?
right. They were. And,
Okay.
and they, but again, it's not a no drop ride. And so,
Yeah.
they let you know that. But, I knew the route. And so, I was, and it was fine. And predictably, I got dropped. So I did the route on my own, and I came in just as they were finishing their coffee and leaving.
Yeah.
And, they invited me back. And so that's how I got into like group
That's
riding.
great. Yeah, that ride report you sent me,
Yeah.
it really was about this kind of slow progression.
Yeah.
You got to start getting faster and faster. And
I also started doing the Alviso noon ride. So this is like a fast criterium style ride, and
okay.
in the South Bay, and I would do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
I found out about I read about Jobst brand.
Okay.
So I found out on Sheldon Brown's website, and also on Ray Hostler's blog, which I would read quite often. And on Jobst, on those ride descriptions, I would see like photos from like the 60s and 70s of all these guys riding in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Yeah.
And to me, that felt appealing, because it felt like they were doing these really hard rides, but
Yeah.
that was not the point of the ride. The point was to get yourself somewhere, and it just seemed like it seemed like there was a greater purpose to their riding.
Yeah.
It's a little more than just timing yourself and things like that. And so I started. I ventured out on my first Jobst ride, and I did like Cosmos Creek Road, which is a very classic Jobst route. And and it was just a revelation for me. you know
Yeah.
and to in the context of where I was at that time, I think now I know like tens of people who would do a ride like that.
Yeah.
At that time, I was in that roadie subculture where it was really, and gravel and was not really a thing at that. So I think just taking my road bike out on a gravel road, it was just not something that a lot of people felt like that's not worth it. Why is that
Yeah.
even fun? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. It's interesting, Saurabh, that you kind of had exhausted the roadie kind of culture and situation, and then you found something else.
yeah. I think I was just surrounded in that by this roadie culture of the South Bay at that time. Um, so I'd heard of the San Francisco Randonneurs from a number of sources.
Yeah.
So I think the earliest mention of SFR would be, if you ever talk to Brian Feinberg and Robert Sexton,
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
ask them about the 2012, December. I did one ride. I showed up on a ride with them, and they were the ones who told me that, oh, we ride with SFR. It's the first time I heard of the club.
Yeah.
But then, so I showed up for my first brevet in November 2016, the Del Porto 200K.
Yeah.
So again, the start it's near the South Bay, so it's not like, it's not a long drive or anything. And it was fun. And I liked it that it was not competitive. It was like a completely new experience for me. Like Rob does the whole oath,
Completely. Yeah.
promise not to do stupid stuff. And that whole experience was very different. I talked to people around this, but PBP is still not on the radar at this point. So I just enjoy the fact that there's people doing longer rides. And then 2017, I joined Rusa, and I started riding with SFR.
And do you remember the first time you heard PBP, Brest Paris?
Well, I think when I went to the San Francisco Randonneurs website, I read about PBP there, and then that would probably be the first time.
And then what year did you really start thinking, oh, maybe I should try this thing in 2019?
Well, I mean, so again, PBP was, when I started on randonneuring, like just even a 300K was really overwhelming at that point. Like even a 200K takes you, anywhere between 7 to 10 hours or longer. And I said, that's plenty of riding for me at this point.
Completely,
so I'm just 2017, I'm just doing 200Ks.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of riding in 2017. So I think that was probably the most miles I logged. But I would be doing, SFR had a 200K every month. So I would do that, but I'd also do my own rides up in the mountains. And so having done a lot of those rides, at the end of 2017, I thought, why not give a 300K a try? First there's not a whole lot of 300Ks on the calendar. So, if you missed the Healdsburg 300K, which is early on, there's only the old cast 300K, which, and it was a really beautiful route. And again, I didn't set ambitious goals for myself there. So I showed up there. I said, I'm going to pace myself, and I'm not going for time. And I did the 300K in 18 hours, which is probably about as much, it's a little less than what it would take most people to do a 400K, and that was a really hard ride. But I think I'd ridden so much in 2017 that I had a good idea of what I need in terms of nutrition and other things. So I did a 300K. And then my plan in 2018 was to just do 300s and maybe do a 400. Maybe. I still don't know if I want to do long rides at this point. But 2018 was when on one of the Populaires, one of the post-ride picnics, is when I talked to Eric Larson, and he invited me to join his Flesh team. So like a Flesh is a 24-hour ride, right? And it's 360 kilometers. And I told him, I have not ridden anywhere close to anything that long, and I have no night riding experience. But I think he sort of knew that I had an interest in dirt riding, and he had an adventurous route out there. And so, I decided, why not? Let's give it a try. I looked at the route, and I decided that if I don't make it, I even had like hotels marked out along the way. I have bailout points. And I did that. That was my first all night ride, and that sort of opened the floodgates for me. Because, that year I realized that, okay, if I just pace myself and I eat properly, and, if I handle those things, I can do longer rides. And so I was encouraged to try the Cascade 1200K that year, which was again, way beyond anything I've planned at this point. But that's where, a number of people said that, if you can, it's the same. You just need to plan it out, and you have enough time for it. And so to prepare for Cascade, I did a couple of 600Ks that year, and that was that sort of opened up the floodgates. So I had zero plan in 2018 of doing anything that long. And it just
happened. It
just
sounds
happened.
like you. Oh, cool.
Right.
All right. Well, let's get to then maybe PBP. So you decided then you did the 1200K successfully, the Cascade ride. And then you just kind of knew, wow, I can do this. Okay. Obviously you can do it because you did the Cascade. And what was kind of your strategy going into PBP? How did you formulate that strategy, etc.?
Well, so again, Cascade is a very different ride from PBP. So I think I should start by saying that, like, I didn't really know that much about PBP going in, right? So because I haven't done, it's not been on my radar really, and it wasn't till I finished Cascade that I really thought about PBP. So Cascade was sort of summer 2018. And I didn't know what time slot to go. Like, why should I pick 80 hours versus 90 versus 84, and what should I go for? And so I picked 84 for a number of reasons. It's because a couple of people that I rode with also picked 84, and I felt like, oh, well, we ride the same, we have a
Yeah.
similar style of riding, and maybe I could, maybe 84 is a good idea.
And Sourav, like, how did you decide? Were you going to ride by yourself? Were you going to ride with others? Were you going to sleep along the way? Like, how did you kind of formulate all that kind of strategy?
Well, again, and I didn't really, since I didn't know a whole lot about PBP, based on the research that I did, it seems like most people have, Ludiac is typically, where people ride till the first
Yeah,
night. So I had a loose plan that was around that, and I also had a drop bag service,
nice.
which
Yeah,
would get me. So there was so my plan was to make it to Ludiac, spend the second night over there as well, make it Brest, come back, stay the
yeah,
second night. The third night was kind of, we'll see how things are going at that
I
point.
get you. Yeah.
Um,
Well, maybe then let's just talk about the actual event then. How did you feel at the start line? Were you nervous?
yes. So getting to, I should start by saying that, like, just getting to the start line had been a bit of an adventure,
Oh,
because
yeah.
when I, in my hotel room, when I was assembling my bike, I'd noticed that my connector for my light was missing. And then it
Okay.
was a bit of a sent out some frantic emails, and someone had a spare connector, helped me assemble
Yeah.
that. On a training ride, it was raining, and I had a front wheel slide out, and I had a very minor crash. Nothing,
Okay.
it was nothing
Yeah.
catastrophic. But these things had sort of rattled
Y-
me a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was kind of relieved to be at the start. But it was also a little exhilarating because, when you're at the start, you're just sort of taken over by all the logistics, right? And now everything's done.
Completely.
It's all behind
Yeah.
you, and now it's all the ride.
Yes.
And
It's another set of issues, but at least you got to the start.
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So all you have to do now is ride, and just the next, 4 days are just about the bike. I don't need to
Yeah.
worry about logistics and that.
And well, maybe just tell us about the ride then. How did it go?
So, I was in a group with, 4 other SFR riders. When we started out, I think the ride typically sort of starts out really fast because everyone's sort of exhilarated about starting and everyone's excited.
Yeah.
I was a little bit rattled by a couple of, moves that a couple of riders that I didn't know they were making,
Yeah.
and it was that's why I was a little more conscious. I decided to just be careful, and I don't want to crash out. That's the worst. That's you absolutely.
Completely. Yeah.
And so, I was riding with 3 or 4 other SFR riders. So when we started out the ride, I think the initial, people tend to be very excited and exhilarated when they're starting, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I was in a group, and I was riding with 3 or 4 other SFR riders, but then I got a little rattled by a couple of moves that some people made. And these are people that you don't know. There's people of different riding abilities. So I became a little conscious, and I wanted to be mindful about, I don't want to crash out at that point.
Completely. Yeah.
So, but we rode as a group for, off and on till the first control, which was Morton,
Yeah.
Morton Push. And Morton, by the way, has the best food along the
Okay.
entire control, I've been told, and it sort of
Okay.
lived up to that.
Yeah.
But after Morton, the wind really started to pick up, right?
Okay.
And I could felt like it was work. And this is where I tried to hang with a couple of groups, but again, I didn't find, uh, you know, the riding styles were really, they were sort of not very good wheels to hold on to.
Yeah.
And so, as much as I would have enjoyed having a good group to ride with at that point, I decided to ride solo.
Okay.
And so you're riding solo sort of into a wind, and that's when it was not going to be smooth sailing at that point.
Okay. Yeah.
And I got to the first control that was the first official control that was Milan. It's
Yeah.
about 200K. And at that point, I mean, there's a full blown wind at that point.
Okay.
And I remember feeling like pretty tired. So I had a nice big meal over there, but I'm still not finding very many people to ride with that are my speed or
Yeah.
like, a good, solid, safe
Compatible.
wheel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So riding from Milan, and then, we move on to the, I reach, I go through a couple of other controls. And by the time I get to Tintaniac at that point, it was pretty clear to me that like I was like running a couple of hours behind schedule at
Okay.
that point, right? You've been riding into a wind. And then at Tintaniac, you're sort of, you know, that's where, right? I remember at Tintaniac, that's where I met Rob Hawks
Okay.
or RBA, and there was a couple of there was a tandem group that they were riding with, and I sort of went with them, and we made it to Ludiac finally. But I think we got to Ludiac probably 4 hours later than I had planned.
Yeah.
I'd ideally hoped for like a few hours of sleep over there, and everything was offsetted. But since it's my first night, I still decided to get like, I think 4 or 5 hours of
Okay.
sleep there. I don't
Yeah.
want to go into the ride this day with, sleep deficit. But that means that, I'm now I'm falling behind schedule,
Yeah.
right? And then the next morning, by the time I started, the sun was already out. Ideally, I should have been out well before
Yeah.
sunrise. But then, the ride out of Ludiac to the next control, that's St. Nicholas, is a little bit
Yeah.
sort of rolling hills, rolling terrain over there.
Yeah.
And this is where, I had a couple of setbacks. There was something on my bike, on my bag was not, I had this reflector on my rear
Yeah.
bag, which was sort of falling off. And I should have just not bothered about it. You don't really need it. I have enough lights. But then in that state, I spent some time like trying to fix that thing over
Yeah.
there. And then at Mortain, as I later found, no, I'm sorry, at St. Nicholas, that turned out to be that was a secret control. So when I rolled in, I rolled over the mat to make sure that the sensors log it there.
Yeah.
And then one of the volunteers over there was directing me to go one way, but I didn't really feel like stopping there because I'd already eaten a bit, um, a little bit before. And so instead of going into the control, I kept going, right? And then about 10 kilometers later, I was talking to another person, and they said, "Oh, did you know that was the secret control?"
Oh. Yeah.
And then that's when I thought, uh, yeah, that's when I realized why the volunteer was asking me to go inside. And
Yes.
so, at that point, I had to make a call. Like, I've already, most likely the sensors have already detected me, but do I need to go? Should I go back or not? And I decided
Yeah.
to not take a risk. I needed that stamp on my card.
Yeah.
So I sort of backtracked my way to Morton,
Wow.
and that detour
Yeah.
sort of costed me some time.
That's tough, man. Yeah.
And
That is
then,
tough.
so anyway, after that ordeal, I decided to just like be really efficient and just sort
Yeah.
of like, I've got to keep going. And so I made it to Car High, uh, fed myself, moved on to Brest.
Yeah.
And at Brest, that was sort of when I was riding across the bridge. I remember like I entered this parking lot, and there was like people on the sides of the road, and they were doing their things. And
Yeah.
just as I was about to enter, everyone drops everything that they're doing, and they sort of turn around and give me like this round of applause.
That's great. Yeah.
And that was like the first time I felt like, I'd reached a sort of milestone on this ride, because it's
Okay.
been all logistics at that point.
Yeah.
So I got to Brest. I found the control was actually closed because we are like the 84-hour group. Most of the groups have already gone through it.
Wow. Yeah.
So I had to find something in town, but I still made it pretty short. And while riding back at this point, right, we're turning back. I was relieved that now that I've crossed 600K, the clock is easy.
Easier. Yeah.
But the tailwind that we were all expecting never really materialized.
Okay.
And at this point, the inefficiencies and this lot of sleep deficit and things like that are sort of banking on. And by the time I got to Car High, entering the second night, right? And the second
Yeah.
night, this was really it at this point, like everything's sort of compounding.
Yeah.
So the second night at Car High was when I started hitting the back of the 90 hours, right? So these
Okay.
are sort of the 90 hour, the stragglers, right? And around the second night was also really, really cold. I remember it was unusually cold for August. Um, and I realized at that point that I actually I had most of the stuff that I needed, but I did have like a neck gate and a couple of arm warmers, and they were all in my drop bag, and my drop bag was in Ludiac. So I
Okay.
still, I mean, I wasn't suffering, but I had
Yeah.
enough, but I could have done with a couple more layers. But I think the people around me were suffering even more because I was running into these, you're running into the 90-hour stragglers, and a lot of them, I tried talking to some of them, and they seem to be having a lot of trouble with the cold. Most
Yeah.
of them were from like warmer countries,
Completely. Yeah.
um, and a lot of them were also very sleep deprived. So, and this is the second night of riding, and some of them were like at this point they were really hallucinating. Right? So you're
Mm.
riding on the road, and there's
Yeah.
people, they're sort of like, you'd be riding along, and somebody goes all the way from like one end of the road, just crosses, just rides all the way across.
Crazy.
These are pretty sleep deprived people at this point, and I think I would describe that as the low point of my
Okay.
ride, because
Yeah.
you know, and at that point I was, it's, you know, it's a mix of feelings I had at that point, because like it was like some of those people were, it was getting kind of dangerous, at a couple of instances where I was hoping that someone doesn't like crash into me. I'm riding, but I'm surrounded by what felt like to me at that time a zombie apocalypse. I said, "Why am I on my bike? What am
Yeah.
I doing? What am I doing here?"
Why is anyone on their bike? Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
You know, and then my but then immediate like almost immediately I kind of realized that these are people that they've invested a lot into this ride.
Completely.
they've
Yeah.
they've trained for the ride, they've made it all the way to France. They're probably emotionally invested in it. They have expectations, their own
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah.
And here they are in Karhai, like they're like hundreds of kilometers away from the finish, and it's not looking good, and they're sort of trying, and that to me that was a little depressing, because
Yeah.
I felt like, is this fun, I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
And at this point I've been riding solo quite a bit,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right? So that night was kind of hard for me, and
And it
my
was
plan,
cold. It
right,
was very cold that night.
very,
Yeah.
very, and I was not going to make it to Ludiac that night, is what I also realized, because going
Yeah.
from Karhai, I got to St. Nicholas, and that's where, the exertion, the lack of sleep is sort of caught on.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think I'm making good progress. So I need to like get a couple of hours of sleep there and then just
Yeah.
ride on into the night. And by the time I got to Ludiac, it was pretty much daytime. So I was hoping to get a whole night's sleep there, but
Yeah.
I'm entering pretty late into Ludiac at this
Yeah.
point.
And you were the 84-hour group, right?
Yes.
So were you worried that you wouldn't make it?
I think I was making enough time at
Okay.
that point. As far as I remember, I think I still had a few hours in the bank when I
Oh,
left
okay.
Ludiac, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly.
Yeah.
But again, so I'm entering now I'm now entering the third day, right? This is from Ludiac. I haven't got as much sleep as I wanted. Maybe hour and a total of maybe 3 hours between controls, right?
Yeah.
And instead of a full night's sleep. And so the third day was really was starting to, all these things sort of compound and
Yeah.
behind schedule, but I still did have, I- if I remember correctly, I had a couple of hours, uh, you know, going out of Ludia.
And Sourav, you're by yourself, is that correct? For pretty much most of this ride so far? Or are you still hanging out with the SFR riders?
No, I think I saw a few SFR riders off and on, but I think
Yeah.
at this point we were sort of all in this in the
Yeah.
state where you sort
Zombie
of,
state. Yeah.
right. I do remember on the third day I met Mateen, and I also remember meeting you right
That's
after that
funny.
Ludia,
Yeah,
right?
that's
I
funny.
remember
Yeah,
that crepe stand.
yeah.
I remember that.
I'm sure I was out of it as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
But that third day was, yeah, I mean, it was, I think, as daybreak came, as the sun came out, I think my own mood sort of improved, you
completely.
know. And at this point, I'm sort of, you are a little sleep deprived, but it's kind of, it's at least you're not riding, and riding at night in that state is a
Yeah,
little more challenging.
I think literally it's darkest before the dawn. Isn't that right?
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
remember that too because it was so cold. Then the sun comes up and you start feeling a little bit better. But
Right. And so I think I made it to Tintaniac that time, and then I remember this was around afternoon, and probably somewhere between Tintaniac and Fougere, I met. I was riding, and I just decided I need to step. I just needed a break from the bike,
yeah.
and so I just sat on the grass next to the road, and that's when Mateen rolled by,
Oh, that's
and
funny. Yeah.
our friend Mateen, and that's when I was thinking, well, if Mateen and I are at the same spot, probably I'm not that slow. Maybe everyone's having a
Exactly.
hard time,
Yeah.
right? And then so by the time I made it to Fougere, it's again it's day three is coming to an end, and now I'm entering the third night. And so this was, I think, pretty at this point, again, all these things are compounding, and it's getting pretty hard. So I was thinking of whether, so am I looking at, can I really ride a whole night at this point? I don't
Yeah.
know. So somewhere between Fougere um, and Villan, right? I ran into Chinook Sheen
Yep.
of this SFR, and I'd been riding solo for a fair amount at that point, and so it was kind of nice to ride with
Completely.
someone that I knew at that point. And we rode into Villan, and as we were getting dinner over there, I remember Chinook asked me, "So what's your plan?" Right, and I said, I think I'm just gonna continue riding to Mortain.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, he looked me in the eye and he said, you should really get some sleep. Like, really,
Okay.
just get some sleep. And then
Yeah.
that's where he also told me that, he said that apparently ACP was no longer, the control closing times did not matter for that, is what they
Okay.
said.
Yeah.
And so he said, don't worry too much about, control closing times anymore. As long as you make to the finish within the 84-hour mark, you'd be okay. And I'm really, I think, I'm not sure if I've said this to him, and he's probably like even forgotten about it. But I'm really thankful that he had that talk with me over there,
Yeah. Yeah.
because if he hadn't talked me into getting sleep at Villan, that would have been a long, long night, long and slow night.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of hours of sleep at Villan, but it was still, that third night was just, there's just people sleeping on the side of the road,
Yeah.
and but then again, I made it through that night, and again, as daybreak comes in, the mood sort of lift up, and then I entered Mortan, I think, with about 5 minutes before the control closing time
Okay.
at that point.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and from Mortan, by this time, to make it to Drew, I think at this point it was starting to feel like, yeah, maybe the prospects of finishing the ride were looking pretty good at that point. And yeah, so and by the time I reached Drew, it was at Drew that it sort of dawned on me that, okay, it's like the last, I don't know what, 60 kilometers or
Yeah.
something, and
Yeah.
it is going to be over. But it did turn out, the ride did turn into a bit of a slog for a number of reasons,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
turned out to be harder than I'd anticipated.
I get you. Yeah. I'm just looking at your Strava time here. Your moving time was 61 hours and 41 minutes, which means that's to make the 84-hour limit, 22 hours and 20, 19 minutes. So, which you made. So what was your finishing time again?
It was
Was
82:26.
okay. So do you plan to do it again? Will we see you in 2027?
Well, so as I said earlier, just sort of when you approach me with this idea for the interview, it's sort of gotten me thinking about PBP once again. And
Okay.
so I want to try it on a fixed gear bike.
Okay.
And
All
so
right.
this is a bike that I got from Mateen shortly before he left us.
Yeah,
Mateen used to ride fixed gears
I do.
a
Yeah.
lot.
Which of his bikes is it?
Oh, this is the independent fab. It's the
Okay, I'm
green.
sure I've seen it. Yeah.
Right. So this is something, and he was a big proponent of like fixed gear bikes, and I'd had this discussion with him, and so maybe it's at the back of my mind, but maybe could
Yeah.
give it a try in 27. But
Have you ridden fixed gear much?
yes, I've actually I rode the Sand Hills 1000K in Nebraska. So
Oh, wow.
I that's actually the longest fixed gear ride. But Sand Hills, it's mostly rolling terrain.
Yeah.
It's nothing as steep as what we have around here.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll have to work on like if I it's a big if,
Yeah.
I'll have to work on gear ratios and other things.
Definitely.
But yeah, but giving it a thought.
What else would be different? Would you do the 84-hour wave again or not?
Almost certainly not. And this is where
Okay.
I know there are a lot of people who are like they feel strongly about the 84-hour group.
Yeah.
I feel like with had I been in the 90-hour group, I might have had a more of a regular PBP experience,
Yeah.
but I would have been solidly in the middle of the pack, which is where I want to be.
Yeah.
And instead, it's with the 84 hours, I sort of kept hitting the back of the 90-hour group, right?
Yeah.
And I think also there was some issues with registration that year, right? So a lot of people signed up for groups that they didn't originally want to, right? So a lot of people signed up for
Yes.
84 because that's all that was left. So I feel like being in 90 hours sort of, you can ride as fast as you want, and there's really nothing stopping you from doing it. But
Yeah.
I think I want to be more in the right in the center of the pack, and that's where you find more riders that are your speed, and
Do you think you'd try to do like 1,000K ride or another 1,200 before you do PBP 2027?
right. So I think 2027 is still pretty far out.
It
So
is. Yeah.
so so I mean I do want to give a 1200 or a 1000K a shot because that will put me in the in the first registration wave. But yeah, but I think I have that as a goal, as a standalone goal, not
Yeah.
because it's going to get me to PBP, but yeah, but yeah, I probably should plan for, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So then we'll just finish with the final question, okay? Which is your 3 tips that guarantee a finish, okay? All right, so tip 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so the first step that I would give to people is that, you know, for all the domestic 1200Ks that I'd done, prior, I did one 1200 and two 1000s, but on all of those rides, there's always a sort of designated overnight control. And so the idea that I had in mind going into PBP was that, oh, my overnight control is going to be Ludiac. And I sort of
Okay.
planned things around it I planned things around that. So my drop bag was over there, and some things that I needed were at Ludiac. And I'm sort of now I'm sort of set on that, right? My second night has to be there. What I realized is that at PBP, every control can be an overnight control. There's services at every control. And I may have been better off just not depending on a drop bag and instead having what I need with me and then just going with the flow. And so that way I'm not sort of slogging to get to Ludiac. I have what I need with me. And so I think sort of planning around that and being more flexible with your
Yeah.
plan is something is what I do next. My second tip would be keep it try any delays and any inefficiencies that you have, they sort of compound over the ride, right? So you want to minimize those at the start. So my approach would be, keep it business in and party out. So
Okay.
on the way into Brest,
Yeah.
be efficient, get as much sleep as you can. You don't want to start with
Mm.
sleep deficit. And then when you turn around at Brest after 600K, the average speed requirement also drops. And you're also probably, if you've been doing things correctly, you'd be ahead of the bulge. And so the controls are less crowded and you can have sort of more fun on the way back, right? So that would be my second tip would be definitely be more efficient on the way in, and then you can enjoy the ride and ride at a more leisurely pace on the way back. My final tip would be to often the smaller controls, the optional controls that you have are ones that people tend to ignore, right? They'll just go through it because they're in a hurry to get to someplace. But what I saw is that these optional controls are often actually better stocked with food, and they're often smaller, right? So everything's really close by. So you don't have to park, unlike Ludiac, right? You don't have to park your bike somewhere and then walk all the way to get your food.
Yeah.
The lines are shorter. So I would actually plan around you know utilizing more services at these places. But my general approach would be, ride as far as you can and then get sleep, and then again ride as far as you can and get some sleep. Don't be Have a plan, have a loose plan, but don't be like too wedded to that.
Excellent. Yeah. Saurav, three excellent tips, really different tips. I like those a lot. Saurav, it's been a complete pleasure. Thank you so much for all your insight. I appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, it was great. Yeah.